variables. Now, what are variables is like when you want to store data, and this is a basic purpose of coding and programming, is that when you code, you basically want to store information and data, and that is stored inside variables. Now, we could create a variable very easily in Python. Now, we just need a naming convention. Now, we could call a variable variable1. And it doesn't matter. You could call it your name. You could call it whatever you would like. So variable1 and just equaling it and just give it an associated value. So I gave a 1000 to this. Okay, so I would just save it. Now you'd see that there is another variable2. Now let me give that a 2000. Okay, good. So we have variable1 as 1000, variable2 as 2000. Now this happens is that this value is associated to this variable name. So we could just print out that. Now we don't have to like go line by line. You could skip lines, and the Python is an interpreted language, so it just goes line by line. So it just checks lines. Okay, it says a missing over here, no problem. Let me check the other line. So you won't get any kind of error related to this. So now what happens is that when we applied our double quotes, we know that we wanted to adopt some string convention, but over here we want to print out a variable. So we have a variable. So we have a variable here like variable1. Now what do you think this is going to be appearing on the screen? Is it going to be variable1 or is it the value? Because it's a variable and it's now associating to its value, so the value 1000 will be appearing on the screen. Now one thing to note is that this pound symbol is just a comment, so I would just like do this for a note, short note, so that you could understand. And the interpreter, the Python interpreter, is not even going to execute this because it's a comment, so it's not going to give an error or something that what did you define here. So it's just going to smoothly run this code. Okay, so now let's run our code. So this is gonna print us 1000, which is defined here in this value. So this is basically a container which is containing this value. This is another container which contains 2000. Now let me save this, and now let me alt and run this. Now you see that 1000 is appearing on the screen. This one, the most recent one. So what I want to do here now is that I want to assign variable2, which is 2000, and I want to see what happens if I just say this. So if I do this, most probably you'll see that 2000 is appearing on the screen. Okay, great. Now what I want to do is I want to reassign 2000. So what I want to do is that I want to assign variable2 as the value of variable1. Now what do you think this is going to be? Now you know that variable1 is how much? 1000, which is over here. So I could put a I could put a comment here, and I would just say, we know that the value of variable1 is 1000. So now basically this is saying that variable2, which had 2000 initially over here in this line, when it comes into this line, it's reassigned to 1000. So even if I print out variable2, it would no longer have 2000 but have 1000 instead. So Control Alt and N, and you see now variable1 is also now, variable2 I mean, is also now 1000. So this is assigning different types, and this is very simple. So now after this, let's talk about arithmetic operations. One operation what we could do is addition. So like for instance, we have a variable num. Okay, so num1 is 10. Now we have another variable num2, and that is 20. Now we want to add or subtract or multiply or divide. Now these are the basic arithmetic operations. So what we could do is that we could say print, and we could basically say num1 plus num2. Now this is basically going to add them. So if I run this code, you would see that the answer to this is 30. So if I Control Alt and end this code, you would see now the terminal screen has 30. So I could like clear the terminal screen because there's too much junk over here, so I could just say CLS, and now you can see the terminal screen is really clear, so you could have more stuff into it. So now after that, I want to see adding. So now let's have subtracting. Now you know that num1 is 10, you know num2 is 20, so you're gonna have a negative number. So let's see, it's supposed to be minus 10. So if I do this, you would see minus 10 is on the output screen. In the same case, we could go for multiplication, and we could also go for subtraction. So let's save this and let's run this, and you would see now there's 200, which is perfectly correct. And now for division, now let's save this, and now you'd see that there's no Control Alt and now you'd see that there's 0.5 over here. Now this is very special here because in Python, the division is also with the decimal parts. Now, if for those of you who are studying programming newly just on Python, would say this is not a big deal, okay? So this is the correct answer. But for others who have knowledge in other languages like C or C++ or Java or JavaScript would know that this is actually something really convenient, because that in division we never had some int and int, which are integers, converting to a whole number. Now this is basically converting to a decimal point number, a floating point number, and this actually is something really good and convenient for Python users. So what I would say that this kind of type over here is an integer, okay? So short for int, and you could do the same for here, which is int. Now when you divide these two, int divided by int in other programming languages is just gonna give you an int. So instead of having 0.5 as our answer, we would just get 0 instead. And the compiler would avoid adding the decimal part to it. So it would just have a plain 0. But having Python with a single division sign, which is a /, it would give you a floating type, okay? So not instead of an integer, but it will give you a floating type. So you could have an integer just having two /s specified, and this is only for Python. So just Control N, and now you'd see instead of having 0.5, you have 0, and this is our integer type. So this is kind of special and pretty neat in Python. So we have basic arithmetic operation done in our Python program, and now what we would do is write basic code to create calculator or something. So let's create a calculator program here. All right, so now we already have our Hello World project already created.